Get started here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's session. I'm really excited about what's going on because we have Michelle Miller Levitt. She is with Heil Sound.
Ideas for limitless power were still considered
Oh, we
pseudoscientific
got something going on there. We got a little background there. Okay. Yeah. So Michelle is the creative marketing director for Heil Sound. And Michelle, how are you?
I'm good.
Welcome.
Thanks.
So we're going to talk some microphone stuff today, which I'm happy about. And you get a lot of questions. Some are questions where people don't know, uh, and then there's others I'm sure that you get. But hopefully you can distill any myths about mics, and we can just kind of learn a little bit. So,
Yeah,
and
that's
that said, I think feel free to take it away.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm excited to be here today to get to talk to you guys about microphones. This is gonna be the nerdiest hour of your day, hopefully.
I love it.
Um, yeah, so I'm gonna get started. Let's get a screen share going so you guys can see this. There we go. Okay. Can you see my screen, Jared?
I can see your screen.
Okay. Is it just my screen or my entire desktop? Because nobody
It looks like no, I can see your. It looks like your browser. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah,
Mhm.
perfect. Oh, there, I got it to go. Okay, so thank you for the introduction. I am Michelle Levitt. I'm the creative and marketing director for Heil Sound. I've been with Heil Sound for over 16 years. Before I was with Heil Sound, I was actually a musician. So I've been using microphones for about 25 years now. I've done professional voiceover work. I have recorded music albums and performed live on stage. So I have used microphones in pretty much every environment that you can imagine. I've also owned a podcasting studio and I have worked on 4 different shows. I've done every aspect of the podcasting business from producing shows to hosting to editing, just all of it. So my first show that I did, my first podcast was 50 Years of Maximum Rock and Roll with Bob Heil. I was just telling Jared about this. It's a really cool show. I'm a little biased because it's my baby, but it's definitely my favorite podcast I've worked on. Our founder, Bob Heil at Heil Sound, used to be the sound guy for the Grateful Dead and The Who. So for our 50th anniversary, I asked him if he would tell some of his stories. And they're absolutely insane. And I've known Bob for over 20 years. And some of the stories that he told, I had never heard before, like doing sound for Jimi Hendrix and Jimi Hendrix setting his guitar on fire in front of Bob, but Bob had no idea it was going to happen. So the stories are really amazing. We had a lot of fun producing that show. And the other shows that I've worked on were definitely audio amateurs, CEOs of businesses, people like that. And the biggest hurdle that all those new podcasters faced was their audio and specifically the microphone. Understanding the mic, how to use a mic, how to sound good on a mic, and how to be comfortable behind the mic. My goal today is to give you the tools to approach your mic with confidence. Make sure I can get this to forward. There we go. Okay, so today we're going to go over 2 different types of microphones, dynamic and condenser. We'll cover sound treatment and what you need. We'll talk about element placement, so essentially where the microphone element is inside the body of the microphone. We'll go over polar patterns and their implications, rear rejection, and why it really matters. We'll cover frequency response and EQ. Of course, we'll talk about gain, and spoiler alert, it's not a volume knob. And lastly, we'll go over microphone tips and techniques to get you the best sound on your microphone. So as a little side note, if you already own a microphone and you're not sure how these topics apply to the microphone that you already own, please reference your owner's manual to find out, do you have a condenser microphone? Is it a USB? Like all those sorts of things. So since we've got a lot to cover, let's get started. Okay, so dynamics or condensers. When deciding on the right type of microphone for your podcast, There are a lot of things to consider, but one of the first questions you should be asking is, should I get a condenser or a dynamic microphone? These terms refer to the type of element in the microphone. The element's the cartridge inside the microphone that picks up sound. You can't generally tell by looking at the outside of the microphone if it's a dynamic or a condenser, but they are very different. So dynamic microphones the elements are made of a synthetic membrane diaphragm, and they're connected to a coil of very thin wire that is suspended in a strong magnetic field. As the sound hits the waves of the diaphragm, the coil of wire vibrates in the magnetic field, and this causes an electrical signal to be produced. If you've ever taken the cover off of a speaker cabinet, you've seen what is essentially a dynamic microphone element, but in reverse. So a speaker takes a signal and turns it into audio, whereas a microphone takes audio and turns it into a signal. Dynamic microphones are durable. They can handle loud audio sources. They do not need a power supply, and you generally don't need to soundproof a room to use one. They don't pick up as much ambient noise also as condensers. Applications for dynamic microphones are just pretty much wherever. They're kind of a jack of all trades mic, and they're typically the choice for professional broadcasting studios. So condenser microphones. These have an element that is made up of a thin film coated with a conductive metallic material, which is suspended over a polarized powered backplate. That's a lot. That's a big mouthful. The condenser diaphragm is part of an electrical circuit that changes voltage with movement, and that voltage becomes the output of the microphone signal. A condenser plate's a flat surface, and it's designed to pick up everything in a very detailed way. Applications are where you need highly detailed sound and you have a sound controlled environment. A soundproof space is really critical to achieving good, clean audio with a condenser. Condensers should not be considered unless you're going to soundproof your space. So it's not a good idea to try to use more than one condenser mic in the same room to record a podcast, because condensers are designed to pick up virtually everything. And that means you really need to know what you're doing in order to keep bleed out of the microphones. And that's where one person's audio ends up in the other person's microphone and vice versa. And I'll touch a little more on the implications of that later. Condensers also need a power source. And this isn't a separate power supply or anything like that. It's called phantom power. Phantom power delivers 48 volts through the mic cable to the microphone. Most mixers, interfaces, or even your computer in the case of a USB mic will provide this power. So since we're talking about condensers, let's talk about various kinds of sound treatment. So what are the differences? Sound waves like flat, smooth surfaces to bounce off of, and depending on the environment you're in and the sensitivity of your microphone, you're probably going to need some sort of sound treatment. So this is a soundproof room. If you're going to be using a condenser mic, then this is the ideal environment for that. I've done professional voiceover work, and I've used like a really, really nice condenser microphone in an environment like this. And it was amazing, but I definitely don't have the budget to do something like this at my home or even at the office at Heil Sound. But if you do, more power to you. Remember how we talked about bleed? It's for that reason that you can't really use more than one condenser microphone in an environment like this to record a podcast, because you're just going to get the other person's audio into that. That's why we have to control so much of the audio when you're using a condenser. So this is an incredible example of sound diffusion. This is Blackbird Studios in Nashville, Tennessee. I've had the honor and privilege to stand in this room and listen to music. This sound diffusion is a series of uneven surfaces that break up sound waves. So a DIY version that you could do of this at home is to sit in front of like a bookcase and vary the depths of the books that you put in it, have some openings that go all the way back to the wall, various shapes of things in the bookcase would be a great example of how you could do sound diffusion at home. Pretty cheap. Any sounds that would have bounced off the flat wall behind you will have been deflected into other areas and not into the business end of the microphone. So sound dampening. Sound dampening can range from moving blankets hung on the wall to something like this. So this is a picture of my former podcast studio in Buffalo, New York. And that cool black and white picture on the wall is actually sound dampening fabric. I had drone photography of the city skyline printed on it at a local print shop. The studio space was a small, essentially an office that had acoustical drop panel ceilings, carpet, thin walls. We regularly had 3 to 5 people in the studio at a time, and we generally spoke across the table from one another, but the sound would start to bounce off the walls behind us and into the microphone. So we put up these panels, and we only had 2 in the whole room. It wasn't a huge amount that we needed, and it really made a huge difference. So any sound dampening or diffusion that you can add behind the business end of the microphone will ultimately help your audio to sound good. So my backdrop that you're seeing today is actually the fabric backdrop that we take to trade shows. So like when we go to Podcast Movement, we put this up in the back of our booth. It was just hanging out at Heil Sound. So I brought it home, and now it looks like I have some fancy professional backdrop, but it's really our trade show booth. Just been repurposing lots of things for my studio environment that I've had to create at home. Oh, and by the way, don't do this. Anyone who tells you to put a blanket over your head to record an hour-long podcast is not your friend. Okay. This is ridiculous. And if you need this in order to make your microphone sound good, you have purchased the wrong kind of microphone for your particular application. So this guy's using a condenser microphone in a less than ideal environment. And I know this because this is actually an article I found from NPR about how their correspondents send in their audio. I could not believe it. I kind of expected a little more out of NPR. So speaking of the business end of the microphone, let's talk about element placement. So microphone element placement plays a critical role when talking about polar patterns. You don't know where the polar pattern is if you don't know where the element is. And you need to know where your element is in order to know how your microphone behaves. So there are 2 different types of element placements. There is end fire and side address. So this is an end fire audio element. It captures microphone or audio from the end of the microphone. People always ask me what kind of microphone I'm using. This is what I'm using. This is the PR30. And the side address microphone just captures audio from the side of the microphone. You can see why this is pretty critical to know if you're talking into the end of the microphone or the side. So now that we know where the element is inside the body of the microphone, we can talk about the polar pattern of the element. So every microphone has a polar pattern. And this is a polar pattern chart that you might find on a manufacturer's website. So what are they? The polar pattern determines how a microphone will pick up audio. And this matters because depending on how you intend to use your microphone, the polar pattern can either help or hurt you. So the polar pattern is the area around the microphone where the element captures audio. So on this chart, note that at the top is a 0. This 0 represents talking straight into the mic element, or what we call on axis. If you can see me in the Zoom window, I am talking on axis on my microphone now. So you'll hear people talk about the rear rejection or off axis, and what they're referring to is that 180-degree mark, or the complete opposite side of the microphone element. So the further you get off the 0 is considered off axis. It's actually a preferable way to use your microphone, is not to talk straight into it. So we'll talk about a little more about that rear rejection in a moment. So you can see why it's important that you know where the microphone element is housed inside the body of the microphone. So let's check out an example. This is the PR40. It's an end fire element. And if you could see through the PR40, it would look a little something like this. And we could see that the element is way up close to the end grill. To understand the polar pattern diagrams, you need to start at the end of the microphone element. This is the polar pattern that we saw before. This particular microphone has a cardioid polar pattern. That means it picks up audio out of the end of the microphone element and slightly off axis, but it does not pick up sound out of the sides or the back of the microphone. And there are different types of polar patterns. And the types of polar patterns dictate their applications. So first up is the cardioid. We just talked about that one. These are really ideal for podcasters. They're very directional and exhibit great rear rejection. So you don't have to soundproof a room to use them. I'll talk more about rear rejection in a moment. The supercardioid is going to have the same application suggestions as a cardioid. It's actually a little more directional and picks up a little less audio from the sides. So it's a little more controlled in the front, but you have to be aware that it can pick up some audio out of the back of the microphone, especially depending on the housing of the mic. So omnidirectional polar patterns pick up audio all around the microphone very evenly. You typically see these for in the field journalism. They're ideal for that application because you can just sort of point them at the audio source, you know, whatever man on the street interview, and you don't have to pay too much attention about microphone placement in front of somebody's mouth. These are not great if you're going to be recording at a desk because they will pick up every paper shuffle, you know, mouse click, everything. If you're using a lapel mic, it is most likely an omnidirectional mic. And if you've ever tried to use one of these to record more than one people, you know that it's going to be just very, very noisy in your mix. So bidirectional polar patterns can be used to record more than one audio source at once, but they are very directional. So you have to carefully place the microphones and then don't move them or what they're recording. I know what I just said sounds very tempting if you're like a host co-host recording situation, but using a bidirectional microphone to record two people is a very bad idea, mainly because you're not going to get separate audio tracks for those people. So you really need one microphone per person being recorded, and you need to record each of those people in their own audio track. So that way, when your co-host sneezes or clears their throat into their microphone while you are saying the most brilliant thing you've ever said, you can just cut it out in post-production. But if you've recorded all into one audio track, you're stuck with it. So rear noise rejection. Now that you understand how the microphone picks up audio, let's talk about what it doesn't pick up. By the way, this concept more applies to dynamic microphones because they are less sensitive. So rear noise rejection, reality time. This is the other side of the beautiful set that you see here. So you saw my old podcasting studio in Buffalo, and I have an office in Heil Sound, and neither of those I get to use anymore. So I am in my house, just like everybody else. That's right. We have a mattress against the wall there. So the reason I recommend dynamic cardioid microphones is so that you don't hear my toddler downstairs playing right now, which is what's happening, and my cat who's trying desperately to get in this room. Rear noise rejection really refers to a microphone's ability to reject other audio sources. Most of us don't have the resources or the bandwidth to create a soundproof studio in their house or their office. We have pets, we have kids, we have a neighbor who mows his grass 5 times a week, or maybe that's just me, I don't know. So no matter what environment you're recording in, rear noise rejection will keep your mic from picking up your co-hosts, keyboards, paper shuffling. I also once recorded a podcast at the NAMM show, which is the largest trade show for the music industry. There's about 100,000 people there. And it is known as one of the loudest trade shows that you can go to. They literally have a hall filled with drums. I did not record in the drum hall. But I recorded in the NAMM show and the audio sounded fantastic. I'm able to record in these unforgiving environments because I use dynamic microphones that exhibit great rear rejection. It would not be possible to do that with a condenser microphone. So think back to that slide of the guy with the rug over his head. This is why you really need to pick the right microphone for your environment. Okay, so now that you understand where a microphone picks up audio, where it doesn't pick up audio, let's talk about how that audio sounds and the frequency response of a microphone. This is a frequency response chart. Frequency response is the range of sound that a microphone can reproduce. Each microphone has its own unique frequency response, and it is that frequency response that affects how the microphone will sound on any given person. People sometimes make a bigger deal out of this than what it actually is. What you really need to pay attention to in a frequency response is the 2 to 5 kilohertz range. So between the red bars in this diagram, this is roughly where the human voice is most articulate, and you're going to want to see a little bit of rise in the response in this area. This will mean that the microphone is going to have an articulate and natural sound on the human voice. If you don't like how your voice sounds on your microphone, this is where some thoughtful EQ can really help. So using equalization controls on an outboard mixer or a digital audio workspace, you can adjust the EQ of your microphone. If you want your audio to be warmer, then increase the low frequencies. Conversely, if your audio is muddy, decrease your low frequencies. If you need more articulation in your sound, increase your mid-range frequencies. And if your audio sounds too nasally, decrease the mid-range. If you want more presence to your sound, increase the highs. And if the sound is too harsh, decrease the highs. These can also be used in combination to really dial in your own sound. By the way, I don't use any EQ on my microphones. It's very important to me that you guys hear what our product sounds like straight out of the box. So I never use any additional processing or EQ. I will tell you, I have an outboard mixer that I run into my camera and into my computer. If you guys want to know more about my setup, I can talk to you about that when we get done. So I can't do this talk without going over gain. So gain is a common issue that comes up with podcasters. Most interfaces, mixers, and some USB mics have a gain control on it. Many podcasters turn up gain when what they really want is volume. I can't stress this enough. Gain is not volume. And I'm going to say this again. Gain is not volume. As you can see on this mixer, gain is the red arrow, which is different than the channel volume, which is the blue arrow, which is also different from the master volume, which is the green arrow. So simply put, gain is the control of the microphone's input level. So that is the strength of your mic's signal. Volume is the control of the microphone's output level, or what podcasters want with perceived loudness. Increasing the volume too much simply makes you sound louder. However, increasing the gain too much at best makes your audio noisy, and at worst can overdrive the mic, causing distortion, crackling sound, and even feedback. So it's best to keep your gain levels around 50 to 60% as a good starting point, and adjust only as much as you need to, very slightly. If you're using a mixer like the one pictured here, you can adjust your channel or master volume after you adjust your gain. If you're using an interface or a USB mic, those tend to only have outboard gain controls, and you'll need to change those levels in your DAW. Too often, podcasters increase gain, not only for volume, but to compensate for improper mic technique, because they're way too far away from their mic, which I'll explain later in detail. So one of the most common questions that beginner podcasters are pondering is if they should use an XLR or a USB mic. A common thing I hear from podcasters is they have a USB mic and no other information. As we've talked about, there are multiple types of microphones and mic features, and it's better to talk about mics as what kind they are first, for example, dynamic or condenser, because the output connection doesn't necessarily tell someone what a mic can or cannot do. However, the mic connection is still important because of their different implications. There are two basic output connections for microphones for podcasting. First is the 3-pin XLR connector. This is the industry standard for professional microphones. They produce an analog signal that requires either a mixer, an adapter, or an interface to be used. On the point of interfaces, most interfaces and USB mixers have a built-in preamp that should be sufficient to drive most well-designed mics without any additional preamp or processing. This issue typically applies only to dynamic mics since condensers are powered through phantom power. The second output connection is USB. These plug straight into your computer. They're already a digital signal. As a generalization, USB mics are more often condensers than dynamics, and they're typically a little more entry-level or intermediate mics. So the last section is maybe the most important. Good mic technique will solve a lot of problems. Unless your product manual tells you not to talk directly into your mic, these tips are going to be very universal. So first, talk 2 finger widths away from the grill of your mic. I know that seems really close. And I don't know if I look strange to you guys using my microphone, but that's essentially how close I am. So I like to use a pop filter for a couple of reasons, but the first is to train podcasters on how to properly use a microphone. And I tell them to either put their chin or their nose on the pop filter, depending on how they have the microphone positioned. This can teach them to stay on the microphone, get used to hearing themselves that way, and trains them not to get too far off their mic. Producers hate nothing more to get audio back that sounds like this when someone has just been like all over their microphone. It makes them crazy, and nobody wants to listen to a podcast like that anyway. So the other reason I use a pop filter is because I tend to be rather plosive with the way that I talk. I also talk off axis so that I'm not bursting those P's directly into the diaphragm of the microphone, which can make it sound harsh and poppy. And I'm also a loud nose breather, which is kind of embarrassing to admit. It also gets worse if I get nervous for some reason. So the pop filter kind of saves me for that. Don't move outside your polar pattern. That's kind of what I was demonstrating to you a minute ago. This will start to degrade your audio, and the number one tip that I can give you for great audio out of your microphone is to monitor your audio. Either have monitor audio speakers, which is a big ask, I understand, or headphones. At least wear earbuds. If you're off your microphone, you're not going to know until your episode is done and in the can. And that is the worst time to find out that you have bad audio, especially if you've done an amazing interview, told a story that you're like, I just really nailed that. And then you go back and listen and it sounds like garbage. I will admit I have done that once and only once. And it was a nightmare. And I had to go back to the guests that we recorded and tell them that we had to redo it because we had a problem with our audio. And I was horrified and embarrassed, and just make sure your audio sounds good. No post-production person wants to hear, sorry about that. You can fix that, right? Like, no. So I want you to see me for this next part because I want to give you some more tips about how to sound good with your microphone. And it has to do with using your microphone. So my first big tip is to sit up straight. It makes you look better on camera than to slouch. But the other thing is it lengthens your diaphragm, allows you to breathe more evenly, especially if you're recording your intro and outro segments. Sometimes even stand up to record if I'm not going to be recording for a super long time. It just really allows me to breathe better. I know that's maybe sort of a strange tip, but breathing is a big part of talking. So the second tip is to not project. So if you were in the same room with me, it would sound like I'm talking very quietly because I'm just talking to my microphone, not talking across the room. My husband and I both use this setup. He was in here doing a podcast last night. He talks very loudly into a microphone and I do not. So when I came in here today, I had to adjust all my levels because he had adjusted everything for him. We use microphones in very different ways. So that's one of the reasons that I say to people, like, have your microphone setting. And the only way you're going to know how you need to set up your microphone is to practice. So get comfortable with how you want to sound for your podcast. If you want to be somebody that's loud and boisterous, go right ahead. Learn to use your microphone, you know, the way a musician would use a guitar. Practice on it. I've even got a good practice example for you. So maybe you're just starting out. Maybe you're getting a new microphone. Call up your mom or your grandmother or some family member who will forgive you if it's terrible, and just practice. Get them on Zoom, practice using your microphone, practice interviewing. You can keep the audio for yourself, maybe tell family stories, keep it archived. I have an audio recording of my grandmother telling a story that is very near and dear to me because she has a very humorous accent. And she gets very tickled, and I love the story and I love having those memories. So it's a great opportunity to practice for yourself, practice your interviewing skills, and learn to use your microphone. Do you sound better when you're up close? Is it better for you closer on axis, or do you need to move a little further off axis to get the sound that you want? Just being comfortable in playing with your microphone, really dialing in your audio. And then one last tip for your environment. Don't be afraid to put your audio setup in not the most ideal, beautiful space. Okay. So what I mean by that is make sure you're listening to your sound. If you're getting a lot of slapback from a wall behind you or a wall beside you, you need to shift a little bit. Before you even move your desk, just take your microphone out of the holder, move around the room, see where it sounds good, and then set up your podcast space in that location. Your natural environment is going to have things that bounce sound or dampen sound naturally, unless you're in a room like, honestly, my office at Heil Sound was one of these spaces when I first got there. Tile floors, hard walls, hard ceilings. I had to do a lot to sort of break up the sound that would just bounce around that room all the time. And we were by a busy road. So, you got to sort of work with the environment you need to record in. And that's never been more true than right now. So don't be afraid to try things out. This is the second room I've worked in our home because the other one just wasn't working out. So, don't be afraid to move around a little bit. Maybe your closet's the best place and maybe you're claustrophobic, so that's not going to work for you. So don't be afraid to try things out, move things around, change up where you're at, how you record. And one of my very good friends who does voiceover stuff, he often records on his couch because he says it gives him the perfect sound dampening space. So don't be afraid to move around. Maybe that means you have to record at 10 o'clock at night when everybody else is asleep. But then at least you have the house to yourself, right? So thank you so much for joining me today. We have quite a bit of time for Q&A, which is exciting. I'm normally like plowing through these things. Just to sort of recap really quick, we talked about different types of microphones, condensers and dynamics. We talked about sound treatment, what you ideally need for your environment, element placement in the housing, and how that pertains to polar patterns, rear noise rejection and why that's really important for podcasters, frequency responses, where you need to look for that sweet spot for the human voice, gain, don't keep turning that up. That's not an option. Microphone connections, whether that's USB or XLR, that's up to you. And microphone techniques. So regardless of what kind of microphone you have, I want you to practice using it and get your best sound for you out of your microphone. So if you guys have any questions,
we do have one question. So one of the questions is, what is the best options for connecting XLR microphones to computers?
Okay, that's a good question. So I've used a variety of different things over the years. I do like Focusrite interfaces. I've had a couple of those. I had a big one when I had the podcasting studio. I have a smaller one that we sort of cart around the house. My husband uses it also to record guitars. Right now, I'm using an Allen & Heath Z10 4-channel mixer. I have a bit of a big setup here because a lot of times I do things like podcast movement where I need to demo microphones for people. So I will regularly have like 4 microphones actually plugged in just for one person. Just weird. That's just my thing. But I like a little outboard mixer. And one of the reasons I like that is because I don't like to dive into a DAW to adjust levels. I like to be able to set my gain, set my channel level, and then set my main mix level. That actually becomes more important if you have more than one microphone plugged in, because like say my husband and I work on something together, he practically screams into a microphone. I'm like, honey, I know they're in Albuquerque, but you don't need to yell. And I talk much softer. So, you know, the amount of gain our microphones take or the amount of line level is going to differ a lot between myself and him. And then we can just adjust our overall mix level after that. So that's really sort of, you know, my picks for how to connect your XLR mic to your computer.
Michelle, we had a question from, looks like Randy, and he wants to know, can you tell us more about shock mounts and boom arms?
Yeah, sure. So a shock mount diffuses audio that is getting transferred, right? So if you've ever used, I hate to name names, but if you've ever used a Blue Yeti, it sits on a desk. And if you tap the desk, I'm tapping my desk right now. If you tap the desk, you're going to hear it because there's not much between the microphone, the element, and the desk. So the idea with a boom arm and a shock mount is the sound vibrations travel through the boom arm. They travel through the shock mount. The shock mount has these like elastic bands. These are probably very familiar to Jared because it's like the same elastic bands you put in a little girl's hair. I mean, seriously, they're the same thing.
Yep.
They're just huge. So those transfer or diffuse the sound. So by the time it gets to your microphone, there's nothing. So you can, you know, tap on your boom arm and it's not gonna, you know, come through. At Heil Sound, we make a really cool boom arm. I've had the displeasure of having to use some bad boom arms over the years, but it has this little channel cover. So you can actually thread your mic cable down it and then just pop this back on, and it's just all completely contained. You don't have to take anything apart. It's just right there. And another thing that you want to be careful with boom arms. So there are a lot of inexpensive boom arms out there that can actually be dangerous. I know this because when we first made a boom arm, it did this, and we had to like work to make them not do this. But if you take your microphone off it, because it's weighted to have a microphone on it, they will fly up and hit you in the face.
Ooh.
Not so great. So make sure you're finding a well-weighted boom arm. Ours have internal springs too, which cut down on spring vibration. If you've ever used, like, I've been in like really high-end radio stations before where they have really crappy boom arms, and I don't understand why, because like if you accidentally touch the boom arm, the springs will go like boing, like seriously for a minute. You got to sit there and wait. And you're like, okay, we can start recording again. I'm just like, how do you have such bad equipment? But yeah. So yeah, that's our boom arm that I absolutely love. It's actually, we sell so many of these boom arms, especially since the pandemic. They've been crazy. Everybody wants them at home because they're easy. They're not crazy expensive. And it gives you a nice clean look on camera since everybody's having to do Zoom calls now.
True. Any special considerations if podcasters are recording directly to a portable recorder? Can they plug their XLR right into it? Any suggestions there?
Yeah. Good question. I actually have a Zoom H6 that I use as well. So I have a lot of gear that I sort of cycle through depending on my needs. And a lot of times when I talk to podcasters, the first question is, what kind of microphone do I need? And my first question back to them is, how are you recording? Are you going to be in a hotel room? Are you always going to be in the same studio? Are you going to do you go to them? Do they come to you? Like, what's your recording environment like on a regular basis? And one of the things that we do with our video work is we record all our audio separately. Obviously, the audio for Heil Sound stuff is very, very important. And it's important to us that we capture our audio almost always on Heil microphones. So I will use a Zoom H6 to record something like the NAMM Show podcast. I can, sort of remote record right there. I don't have to carry a bunch of gear. You don't have to do anything special to use those, but I will say most of the time when I use a Zoom H6, I will use something more like a PR37, which is a handheld microphone. This particular microphone is the same microphone element as the one I'm using, so it sounds very, very similar. But in a handheld version, these are used on like live sound stages and stuff, but you can hold the microphone and pass it around and stuff like that, and it won't, you won't hear that. So that's a good option. If you're going to go that route of using like a Zoom H6 and you want to be able to move your audio setup quickly and easily, that is a great way to do that. And I know a lot of people that do that. They know that they're going to record some of their episodes outside of the house, so they just always use that same equipment. So it can definitely work in your home studio environment too.
So post-pandemic, that would be a good mic to take on the road if you're doing any kind of recording outside of your normal area.
It's going to be my new go-to for remote recording. I know everybody's like, oh, PR40. And I love the PR40, but it's not my mic. And that's why I really emphasize to people to find the right microphone for, I see somebody saying Michelle's at a low audio level. Gosh, that was way long ago. I have that issue with Zoom sometimes. I don't know what that's about. Let me see if I can bump up my main mix level. Is that better?
I think you're supposed to turn up the gain, Michelle. No? Okay.
Yeah. No.
No. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So handheld mics, go to finding the right microphone for you. That's where I was at. I use the PR30 because it's the one that sounds the most like me. And it's very important to me that I sound like myself. When you meet me at a trade show, I want you to recognize my voice and not think like, oh, she uses a lot of processing on her audio. Because it's kind of weird. I liken it to when you finally meet your real estate agent and you realize that the picture on all their marketing materials is actually 10 years old. Right? I mean, I'm not the only person that's had that experience. So yeah, I want to sound like myself. I use the microphone that best fits my voice.
Oh, that's a good one. Oh my goodness. All right, let's see. If you have any other questions, feel free to raise your hand, or you can put a message in the chat. You did mention something, Michelle, about showing us your setup. I don't know. Is that something you can do, or if you can't, don't worry about it.
I don't know if I can turn my camera around without.
Okay, well, I don't want to create trouble. So.
Seasick. So I'll tell you what my setup is. So okay. I'm using a PR30. I have a PRSM shock mount and a PL2T boom arm. The PR30 is definitely my choice currently. I do switch out microphones quite a bit. This is probably the one I've been using the longest. Mm-hmm. It helps that I'm not in the plant anymore because we make custom microphones, and when a new cool finish would come in, I would usually use it because we'll make two. Like if somebody orders like a marbleized finished microphone, we'll make two, and then we take them to like trade shows and stuff like that. So I would end up with all these really cool custom microphones in my office, and I would rotate out microphones all the time. But now that I don't have that, I've been using the PR30 for a while.
Yeah.
So
slumming it with the 30.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. So that's running into an Allen and Heath Z10 mixer. Mm-hmm. I'm just running one channel today because I'm just running one mic. That runs into my Sony XD camera, and that runs through a Camlink 4K, which gives me my nice 4K video, regardless of the platform that I use, which I love because I think I got this right before Podcast Movement, because we set up the trade show booth for Podcast Movement, which was sort of the impetus for bringing all this stuff home. Mm-hmm. And I set it up, and we were doing like a tech check like a few days before with our sales manager, because he had set one up in his garage too. And he goes, Michelle, your image is so pixelated that the Heil logo was like stair stepped behind me. I was like, ooh. I'm like, I got to do something about that. So that's where the Camlink 4K came in, and I love it.
Awesome. I know you touched on this in the presentation, but if we can just kind of hit on it for a moment, the sound treatment options for rooms that are less than ideal for recording. What's the opinion there? If you can just kind of touch on that again.
Yeah. I hate the just turn off your AC and your heat and it'll be fine. Like, I don't think that you should not have to suffer like that.
Right.
So one of the important things is that directionality of your microphone, right? So if you have a condenser microphone, there's not much you're going to be able to do about that. If you have a dynamic microphone, make sure that any sort of unfortunate audio, like if you have a loud air conditioner or something like that, is off the back of the microphone. So that audio is not entering directly into the business end of the mic. In my studio at Heil Sound, like I said, I had all these hard surfaces that were kind of a nightmare. I put up sound dampening panels on the wall and just a big cheap IKEA rug on the floor. And that was really all I needed in that space. Now, I will tell you the times that we would record video work and use like an omnidirectional lapel mic, the outside road there is so noisy that we would constantly have to stop recording to wait for cars to go by. And we would only record at night so the phones wouldn't ring because those microphones would just pick up everything. But, there are occasions where we have to use those as well. So it really sort of highlights when I have to use a mic like that, why I choose to use microphones like this in any other scenario, because I just don't have to worry about those other things. Moving blankets are a great option because they have that extra layer of padding. If you have a spare guest bedroom mattress like I used to, it makes great sound dampening material. This trade show booth thing is actually cool because it's 2 pieces of fabric, so it's an extra layer of dampening. I mean, you can just go to like Michael's and make your own, right? Get one of those frames, like you were going to build a canvas for a painting. They sell just the frames. And then you could wrap whatever fabric you want around it. You could put a moving blanket on it and then some sort of fabric of like whatever you want. There are also companies that you can custom print fabric. So that would be an option too. Wrap that IKEA moving blanket around there, staple that on there, and then get something printed with your logo on it. And there you have homemade custom sound dampening material. Like the ones I had in my podcast studio, they were not that expensive. I think it was like $200 for both of them. And they were huge. I had to put them on top of my SUV to get them to the podcasting studio. They were so massive. And it was drone photography that somebody had taken of the city. And it's cool because most podcasting studios are a windowless room. And so it gave us sort of a skyline view from a windowless office space in the middle of a building. And it helped with the sound.
But that wasn't the picture from your Buffalo setup, was it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So you actually had that in your slide. Yeah, that was nice.
Yeah, that was my studio in Buffalo. It's still there. I sold it when I moved. So sad. I miss that studio.
But we don't recommend actually hiding under a blanket. That's one of the takeaways.
Yeah, and you know what the takeaway is? If somebody tells you put a blanket over your head as a part of your sound treatment, they don't know what they're talking about. Don't listen to anything else they say. Yeah, styrofoam would work. That's a good that would be a good low cost option. Just get like the thick insulation styrofoam from like the hardware store. Yeah, crowded coat closet.
Yeah, you don't have an issue with that, do you? Right? I'm sure there's people that are saying, "Hey, I'm in my closet."
Yeah. No, I understand that. Like, if you have space issues, we have a lot of people that like. One of the most popular products we sell is this teeny tiny wall mount that you can put like a whole boom arm in. Like, we constantly sell out of this thing. I don't understand it, but people that are like in small little spaces, you can mount this thing on the wall, put your boom arm in it, and then when you're not using it, the whole thing just swings against the wall flat. So it makes a ton of sense. But yeah.
Let's see. Paul says lots of voice actors use it. meaning the
Yes.
closet. Yeah.
Yeah. It's because they're usually using condenser mics to get that super detailed sound. Um, if you go to our website, to our podcast landing page, we have like a testimonial from one of my longtime friends is a professional voiceover guy in LA, and he does sometimes record in his closet, but he uses our microphones and he records everywhere. He told me he has recorded. This was so specific. I don't know why. It's like in the family bathroom in Dallas airport. And I was like, why do you remember like the specifics? But he had to record like pickup audio. They were like, we need you to just say this one word again. And so he's like in the bathroom at the airport with he did put a coat over his head, he told me, because
Yes.
I can't imagine. It's like all hard surfaces. There's no way that's going to sound good. I just like, I don't even want to know what that was a voiceover for, because if I ever hear it, I'm never going to get out of my head the fact that he was in a bathroom in an airport doing that.
As long as it sounded good. And yeah, I hope he washed his hands. So.
And his microphone.
And and his microphone. Yeah. Michelle, we really appreciate this. Just a couple last questions before we wrap up here. What if people want to stay connected with you, or they want to learn more about Heil? Where can they do that?
Yeah, I'm personally on LinkedIn. Heil Sound has a very active Instagram account. We love seeing pictures of how people use their microphones. We're always surprised and impressed by what you guys do with your stuff and how your setups are. Our website's heilsound.com. There's a version of this talk on our website. So say you have a co-host that maybe desperately needs to hear this talk. If you go to heilsound.com/microphones101, there's a version of that there. You can sign up for our email list if you're interested in finding out about new product releases. We just launched a new version of the PR40 in an all black finish that is, I'm going to be honest, just really sexy looking.
Woo. Yeah.
I like it.
That's pretty.
So yeah, to keep up with us and what we're up to, you can sign up with that. We don't send out a ton of emails, so don't feel like you're going to get like, 100 of those. We do have a podcast specific one that you can sign up. You'll get some tips, and then I promise we don't spam people.
Excellent. As we close out here, what do you have any final thoughts for folks that are wanting to have the best sound possible for their shows? Practice. If
you can't hear yourself, you don't know if you're doing it right. So listen to your audio and practice.
Interview
you can
your
just
aunt.
get on Zoom and hit record.
True.
And just practice. Like, read a passage from your favorite book. Like, work on your mic technique. Record something on Zoom that you think you like, and then listen to it back to see if you actually still like it. Try different things. Talk louder, talk softer. Just working your mic. Like, if you think about how a singer uses a microphone as a part of their instrument, that's the position you're now in as a podcaster. You're a voiceover actor, and you're going to have to learn how to use your microphone. The idea that having bad audio is okay for podcasting would be like if I started an Instagram account and published only pictures that were out of focus.
Don't do that.
Sounds awful, right? So you do need good audio for your podcast. You can have good audio from your podcast, and a big part of that is practice.
Well, Michelle, we are grateful to you. We're grateful to Heil for the support for podcasters, and we hope to see you in Nashville this August, assuming it's safe. And yeah, best wishes to you and the family and everything going on there.
Thank you so much. We are so hoping we get to see you guys all in Nashville this year.
Likewise. Okay. Have a great day. And thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.